Hey, everybody. We're going to be in John chapter 10 today, and I'll explain my sheep friends here in just a second. But John chapter 10 is another great chapter. It's the chapter where Jesus talks about how he is the good shepherd, and it's also the chapter where Jesus defends his deity to the Pharisees and to everybody that wanted to stone him and kill him. So it's an awesome chapter, so hopefully you've had a chance to read through it. But at the beginning of this chapter, when Jesus is talking about being the good shepherd and how shepherds know their sheep and the sheep know their shepherd and follow their shepherd, over the fall when I was out hunting, I got a real life example or illustration of this passage. So when I was out hunting, the area that I was hunting was the same area that a shepherd was running his sheep. And this shepherd had about 100 sheep. And so this is a picture that I took of his sheep. And it was amazing to sit and watch this guy and interact with him. This guy was from Peru, so he spoke quite a bit of Spanish, way more Spanish than English, obviously. And so I didn't get to talk to him a whole bunch, but just watching him work with his sheepdogs, watching him work with his sheep, it was pretty awesome. And so when I read through John chapter 10 now, this is the image that I have in my head of all these sheep out in the wilderness being overlooked by one man and his dogs. So it's a pretty awesome picture. And so in verse 4 of John chapter 10, it says, when he puts forth all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And that's exactly what happened out there with this sheep herder. I mean, there were 100 sheep, and he would walk through the woods, miles through the woods with all these sheep, and every night they would end up back in the same exact place where his camp trailer was and spend the night there. They'd walk miles and miles all day, and he'd come back with every single one of those sheep. Those sheep would follow him anywhere. He was able to corral those sheep and lead those sheep, and he wasn't yelling and screaming. It was just a gentle nudge, and he was able to lead them along the way. It was awesome to watch. And so, man, you know what? And that's exactly how Jesus leads us. Jesus is with us. He's not loud and obtrusive, and he's not yelling and screaming at us, but he's just softly and quietly leading as long as we're willing to follow. So I love that picture. And then it goes on in chapter 10, and it says that he is the door, and if anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find a pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And thinking about that from the shepherd's standpoint, this shepherd out here in the wilderness was giving his sheep an abundant life, because without the shepherd, they wouldn't have been able to wander through the wilderness. I mean, they would have been cooped up in their pastures with a small fence, not being able to see much, not being able to get fresh water, not being able to safely graze amongst the trees. But because they had a shepherd who was watching over them, they were able to have an abundant life and live out in the wilderness and roam through the trees. And that just, to me, brings a whole new meaning to abundant life. Because if it wasn't for Christ, we'd be trapped within the confines of sin and brokenness. But because of Christ, we can live an abundant life. We can drink from the streams of living water. We can live out in the wilderness. We can go around through the trees and rest in the shade and warm up in the sun. And because of Christ, we can have freedom and we can have this abundant life. And that became even more clear for me when I was with this shepherd and these sheep. Because if the shepherd wasn't out there taking care of them, watching over them, leading the way, they'd get lost and they'd die. They wouldn't have a life, let alone an abundant one. But that shepherd provided that for them, and Jesus provides that for us. So I just love this imagery. And the other thing that impressed me too with this shepherd is how much he was able to control his dogs with a little whistle. And depending on how he whistled, it made the dogs do something different. Like, it doesn't take much for them to follow him. It shouldn't take much for us to follow Christ, because we know that he knows what's best for us and he has our best interests at heart. So let's make sure that we're following him. Man, Jesus shouldn't have to beat us over the head to get us to follow him. We should follow him because we trust him. These sheep follow because they trust and they believe that the shepherd knows what's best. And that's what Jesus is saying in this passage. And Jesus also, mind you, he had to give up a lot to be the shepherd. He laid down his life for us. This Peruvian shepherd, he had family, a wife and kids, if I remember right, back in Peru that he doesn't see for months and months at a time while he comes here to take care of these sheep. He gave up a lot to be here for the sheep. Jesus gave up a lot to be here for us, to be our shepherd, so that we could have an abundant life. And I love verse 18. No one's taken his life away from him. I lay it down on my own initiative. Nobody forced Jesus to do this. Jesus chose to do it. Jesus chose to come here to die for us. Jesus chose to come here and live for us. Jesus chose you over the comforts of heaven. How awesome is that? Well, guys, John chapter 10 is a great chapter. Take some time, read through it, and allow God to be your shepherd today. Follow him wherever he leads. Guys, have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow for John chapter 11.